Richard Barthelmess, Part 6. In 1933, Richard, according to Mick LaSalle, used the trend towards social awareness to become more uncompromising in both his subject matter and more strident in his approach to make these films. He was leveraging the most precious capital a film star has, his popularity, to reach the people of the time. One of the films that year was Heroes for Sale, in which he played Tom, a World War I veteran that gets addicted to morphine after being hospitalized for his war injuries. During the 1920s, he makes a new start, finds a wife in Loretta Young's Ruth, success as a laundry driver, and helps a friend get a patent on a new machine and get lots of money for it. In the process, he fights for the workers' rights that will be building and distributing the machine, as seen in the following clip.
One thing, very important. These machines must not be used to throw anybody out of work or to cut salaries. We're leasing them to you for one purpose, to increase production, making our jobs easier and to make our working hours shorter.
You're a real humanitarian, Tom.
Although the character gets rich and finds success, Tom and all of the other plant employees are laid off, leading to a mob, as seen in the following clip.
Get out the way! You're crazy! These fast machines, they'll only build more! I've got to go and try and stop them!
No, Tom, don't! You can't! Tom, they'll kill you! Tom!
In both of these clips, Richard's passion for the working man shines through his acting. It is obvious that Richard made this film to highlight the plight of the working man during the early years of the Great Depression, and was commenting on the uncertainty and lack of rights for this common worker. His acting has all the emotional intensity as all of his silent films, as you saw, with the added bonus of his rich and powerful vocals. While I cannot find the box office data for Heroes for Sale, it got Richard, per usual, good notices. The New York Times wrote, Mr. Barthelmess carries on bravely under the afflictions which fall to the lot of Tom. In 1934, Richard released one of his last pre-codes at Warner Brothers, Midnight Alibi. It was his last pre-code at Warner Brothers, which saw him in a dual role based on a Damon Runyon story, The Old Dollhouse. Richard played Lance McGowan, a gangster on the run from a rival that takes refuge in the house of an old lady played by Helen Lowell, just referred to as the Old Doll. He bears a striking resemblance to her late love, and we see him portray him in a flashback. Lowell's character was played by Helen Chandler in the flashback. Eventually, when Lance is accused of murder that he didn't commit, the old woman steps in as his midnight alibi. I watched this movie several months ago on TCM and found it lovely and riveting. Richard was entirely convincing as both the good-hearted gangster, similar to his character in Weir River, and as the doomed love in the flashback. The New York Times wrote, First National has made a little plot go a long way. The credit, of course, is due largely to the cast. Mr. Barthelmess, Miss Lowell, and Miss Chandler have turned in good performances. After making two last starring films in 1935 and 1936, Richard took a break. He, for the first time since his childhood, returned to the stage, this time the Broadway stage of the Lyceum Theater. The play was the first staging of James N. Cain's novel, The Postman Always Rings Twice, which would later be made into two successful films, one in the 40s and one in the 80s. Richard starred as Frank Chambers, a drifter that falls in love with a young woman with an older husband. Together, they plan to bump off the husband. Complications ensue. While the novel and later films were hits, the play unfortunately only ran for 72 performances. Richard's performance was well received, but the play was considered too depressing and the characters too unlikable. But, according to the playbill, Richard saw the production as the fulfillment of a long-felt desire to round out his career in the legit. In 1939, Richard decided to return to films. While his star power had waned, he still proved excellent as a supporting character actor in 4 more movies. The first movie was Only Angels Have Wings, in which Richard played Bat McPherson, a pilot husband to Rita Hayworth's Judy, who was disgraced after allegedly leaving a friend to die on a previous doomed flight mission. McPherson's bravery on another mission saves the day and finds his reputation saved. The stars of the film were Cary Grant and Jean Arthur, but Variety particularly singled out Richard's work. The film was a huge hit commercially, and the New York Times also praised Richard and all of his starring castmates. In 1940, Richard appeared in The Man Who Talked Too Much, supporting George Brent and Virginia Bruce. Richard played J.B. Roscoe, who was, in a role reversal for Richard, a really villainous, nasty gangster. Take a look at the work featured in this.
Stephen Paul speaking. Drop that phone, Steve. Drop that phone or I'll let you have it. Step back, you two. Look.
As you saw, Richard's usual commitment in constructing his characters was present. It is refreshing to see him be a real villain this time. This gangster, different from Weary River or Midnight Alibi, does not have a heart of gold and is a cold-blooded killer and racketeer. The New York Times said that Richard chips in with a conventionally dour gangster performance. Richard made 2 more films before his retirement, 1942's The Spoilers with Marlene Dietrich, Randolph Scott, and John Wayne, and 1942's The Mayor of 44th Street with Anne Shirley and George Murphy. However, by the end of 1942, Richard left films again, this time to enlist in the Navy Reserve in World War II. Following the war, Richard decided to retire for good and spent the rest of his life living off his successful real estate investments while enjoying time with his wife and children. In 1957, Richard received a George Eastman Award for his contributions to the art of film. Richard seemed to enjoy a quiet and peaceful retirement until his death from cancer at age 68 in 1963. So, we are left with the question, why did Richard's career, which started out so strongly in the talkies, eventually falter? Ultimately, Richard had been working in films for 20 years before he decided to walk away and return to the stage in 1935. He told a reporter that year, "I've said goodbye to youth. I think Richard just needed a break and got tired from his grueling film schedule. When his Broadway debut wasn't as successful as he had hoped, he decided to return to the films briefly, but realized he would be happier just being retired. He also had achieved everything he wanted to do in the movies. He created wonderfully complicated characters with ranges of emotions that were often unmatched by his peers. He was nominated for the first Academy Award for Best Actor, helped found the Academy, made a successful transition to talkies, and brought to the public's attention relevant societal issues that through his powerful pre-code films. He also was a producer." Thank you, Richard Barthelmess, for your fearlessness as an actor and your bravery in producing films to address the very relevant problems that plagued American society in the early 1930s when no one else would touch them. You are a true trailblazer and artist. As usual, check out my YouTube video descriptions to find links of where you can watch Richard's amazing work. Next week, join me as I study the silent but talky career of one of Richard's frequent co-stars, the beautiful Lena Baskett. Thank you for joining me. I'm Charlie. Have a great rest of your weekend and happy Thanksgiving.